On a quiet stage in London, a 28-year-old woman stood before the world's most famous judges. She didn't look like a typical star. She looked like someone who had been told no 1,000 times. When Sydnie Christmas began to sing Tomorrow, the room fell silent. It wasn't just her voice that captured the audience, but the raw, visible weight of a decade of broken dreams she carried on her shoulders. But behind that golden buzzer moment lay a history of rejection that nearly broke her spirit. How did a girl with such immense talent end up working behind a gym desk, believing her light had finally gone out? The answer lies not in a single moment of tragedy, but in a long, quiet battle against invisibility. Sydnie Christmas grew up in Gravesend, Kent, a place that felt a world away from the bright lights of the West End. From the moment she could speak, music was her entire world. While other children were playing games, Sydnie was practicing her scales. She wasn't just a girl who liked to sing. She was a girl who felt she had to sing. It was her sanctuary and her way of understanding the world. Her family recognized her spark early on, seeing a talent that seemed to vibrate with a special kind of energy. She eventually worked her way into the D&B Academy of Performing Arts. Here, she was a dedicated student, graduating with dreams of becoming a leading lady. In those early days, Sydnie believed in a simple formula. If you work harder than everyone else and have a voice that can reach the back of the theater, success will find you. She entered her 20s with a heart full of hope, unaware of how cold the professional theater world could be. However, as she began to attend auditions, the simple formula started to fail. Sydnie spent years traveling back and forth to London, putting her soul into every song, only to be met with silence or a polite thank you next. The West End, it seemed, wasn't looking for her. This was the beginning of a long period of emotional erosion. She was talented enough to get through the door, but never enough to be chosen for the role she craved. The psychological toll of being almost good enough is a heavy one. It creates a specific kind of self-doubt that whispers that you are the problem. Sydnie began to watch her peers land roles while she remained in the wings. She took jobs that kept her near the stage, but not on it. She worked as a camera soul, on cruise ships, and took shifts in local gyms to pay her bills. Every time she handed a towel to a gym member or stood behind a camera instead of in front of it, a small part of her confidence withered away. Just as she was about to give up on her dreams for good, an unexpected opportunity in a foreign land offered a glimmer of hope. But would it be the breakthrough she needed or another painful dead end? Desperate for a change of scenery and a chance to prove herself, Sydnie took a massive gamble. She moved to Germany to perform in the musical Starlight Express. On paper, this looked like a victory. She was finally being paid to perform. But the reality was far more complicated and lonely than she had imagined. While she was on stage, she felt alive, but the moment the curtain fell, she was a stranger in a strange land. Living in a different country, away from her family and friends in Kent, Sydnie faced a profound sense of isolation. She didn't speak the language fluently, and the culture was unfamiliar. This period was a deep dive into the loneliness of the long road. She was performing, yes, but she felt like a ghost in her own life. The tragic element of her journey wasn't a sudden disaster. It was the slow, grinding realization that even when she achieved a dream job, the feeling of being truly seen still eluded her. The psychological weight of this isolation began to change her. She became more introspective and more guarded. She began to see her talent not as a gift, but as a burden that had led her far away from everything she loved. She spent long nights in her apartment in Germany, wondering if she had made a mistake. Was the pursuit of fame worth the loss of connection? Despite the professional success of the show, Sydnie's self-worth continued to decline. She felt like she was playing a character both on and off the stage. She was a professional singer, yet she felt more invisible than ever. The pressure to maintain a perfect image while struggling internally created a fracture in her spirit. She was learning the hard way that fame, even on a small scale, cannot fill the holes left by loneliness and a lack of belonging. As her contract in Germany came to an end, The world changed in a way no one could have predicted. Sydney was forced to return home, but the life waiting for her was not the one she had left behind. When Sydney returned to the UK, the timing could not have been worse. The global pandemic had arrived, and the world was shutting down. For an artist, this was a special kind of nightmare. Theaters were boarded up, auditions were canceled, and the momentum she had built in Germany vanished instantly. Suddenly, the singing career she had fought so hard for didn't just feel distant, it felt non-existent. Sydney found herself back in Gravesend, living in her childhood bedroom. The contrast was jarring. One month she was on a stage in Germany. The next, she was filling out applications for any job that would have her. She eventually landed a position as a receptionist at a local gym. This was perhaps the lowest point in her psychological journey. To the people checking in for their morning workouts, she was just a friendly face behind a counter. They had no idea that the woman handing them their locker keys possessed a voice that could move thousands to tears. This period was marked by a deep sense of mourning. Sydney wasn't just mourning a job. She was mourning an identity. She stopped telling people she was a singer. When new acquaintances asked what she did, she simply said she worked at the gym. The questions about why she hadn't made it, yet were too painful to answer, and the pity in people's eyes was even worse. The mental toll of being so close yet so far began to manifest as deep-seated anxiety. She began to believe that her time had passed. In the world of entertainment, there is a cruel, unspoken rule that if you haven't succeeded by your mid-20s, you are past your prime. At 28, Sydney felt like an ancient relic of a dream that had failed. She looked at her reflection in the gym mirrors and didn't see a star. She saw a woman who had tried and lost. The silence of the theaters felt like a final judgment on her talent. With her 30th birthday approaching, Sydney made a quiet, desperate pact with herself. She would give her dream one last chance, but the platform she chose was the most terrifying one imaginable. The decision to audition for Britain's Got Talent was not made with confidence. It was made with desperation. Sydney felt that if she didn't try one more time, she would live the rest of her life wondering what if. But the fear of public rejection was paralyzing. If the West End had said no in private, what would happen if the entire country said no in public? When she finally walked onto the stage in front of Simon Cowell, Amanda Holden, Alicia Dixon, and Bruno Tonioli, she looked visibly shaken. The psychological stakes were higher than the audience could possibly know. This wasn't just a competition for her. It was a final validation of her entire existence as an artist. She chose the song Tomorrow from Annie. It was a choice that felt almost too simple. But for Sydney, the lyrics represented the hope she had been trying to hold onto for 10 years. As the first few notes left her mouth, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was as if the years of working in the gym, the lonely nights in Germany, and the hundreds of no's were all being channeled into the music. It wasn't just a technical performance. It was an emotional purge. The judges, usually so quick to critique, were mesmerized. They didn't just hear a singer. They heard a woman fighting for her life. When the song ended, the silence was replaced by a roar of applause that Sydney hadn't heard in years. The look on her face was one of pure shock. She had spent so long expecting failure that she didn't know how to process success. When Amanda Holden reached for the center of the desk and pressed the golden buzzer, the world seemed to explode in gold glitter and sound. Sydney collapsed to her knees, sobbing. These weren't just tears of joy. They were the release of a decade's worth of suppressed disappointment and heartache. The golden buzzer was a miracle, but as the confetti settled, a new and unexpected storm was brewing. Would the public embrace her, or would they find a reason to tear her down? In the world of reality television, a golden buzzer usually brings universal praise. But for Sydney, the celebration was short-lived. Almost as soon as her audition aired, a wave of public scrutiny began to rise online. Because she had performed in Germany and had a background in musical theater, some viewers began to claim the show was rigged. They called her a professional and argued that the show should be for ordinary people, not someone with her training. This was a devastating blow to Sydney's mental health. She had finally allowed herself to feel a moment of worth, only to have it questioned by thousands of strangers. The professional tag felt like an insult because it ignored the reality of her struggle. The critics didn't see the years of rejection or the shifts at the gym reception desk. They only saw a polished 3-minute performance and assumed she had been handed everything on a silver platter. The psychological impact of this backlash was profound. Sydnie found herself in a position where she had to defend her own struggle. She felt like she was being punished for being good at what she did. The joy of the golden buzzer was replaced by a defensive anxiety. She spent hours scrolling through comments, watching her dream be picked apart by people who didn't know her story. This is the tragic side of modern fame. Even when you win, you can feel like you're losing. Sydnie had to decide if she was going to let the narrative of the professional plant define her, or if she could find the strength to stay true to herself. The pressure was immense. She wasn't just preparing for a semifinal. She was preparing to prove to a skeptical public that she deserved to be there. The girl who had felt invisible for so long was now being seen, but not in the way she had hoped. As the semifinals approached, the tension reached a breaking point. Sydnie knew that her next performance had to be more than just good. It had to be undeniable. But could her nerves hold up under such intense scrutiny? The week leading up to the semifinals was a blur of rehearsals and mounting pressure. Sydnie felt the weight of the professional labels pressing down on her. Every mistake in practice felt like a confirmation of her critics' words. She was no longer just singing for herself. She was singing to silence a choir of doubters. The psychological strain began to take a toll on her voice and her sleep. When she stepped out for her semifinal performance, the atmosphere was different. The audience was loud, but there was an edge of expectation that hadn't been there before. Sydnie chose to sing My Way, a song made famous by Frank Sinatra. It was a bold choice. The lyrics speak of a person who has faced challenges and done things their own way, regardless of what others thought. It was her response to the critics, but it was also a deeply personal anthem. As she sang, her vulnerability was on full display. She didn't try to hide her nerves. She leaned into them. The performance was powerful, but it was also raw. You could see the tension in her shoulders and the focus in her eyes. She was a woman who had been pushed to the edge and was now standing her ground. By the end of the song, the judges were on their feet once again, and even the most cynical viewers had to admit that her talent was extraordinary. However, the psychological battle wasn't over. Even after a successful performance, the rigged rumors persisted on social media. Sydnie had to learn a difficult lesson about fame. You cannot control what people think of you. You can only control your own performance and your own truth. She began to pull away from her phone and focus on the music. She realized that the only way to win was to stop trying to please the people who were determined to dislike her. She had to find her way back to the girl in Gravesend who sang because she loved it, not because she needed a yes. She had made it to the final, but the ultimate test was still to come. Could she overcome the final hurdle and claim the prize that had eluded her for a lifetime? The night of the Britain's Got Talent final was electric. The air was thick with the dreams of the remaining contestants, but for Sydnie, the stakes felt unique. This was the culmination of a 10-year journey. She knew that this single night would determine the trajectory of the rest of her life. The gym reception desk felt like a distant memory, but the fear of returning to it was very real. Sydnie chose to sing Somewhere from West Side Story. It is a song about a place where there is a time and place for us. For someone who had spent her entire adult life feeling like she didn't fit in the industry, the lyrics were incredibly poignant. As she stood on that stage for the final time, she wasn't thinking about the prize money or the Royal Variety performance. She was thinking about every audition she had ever failed. The performance was a masterclass in emotional storytelling. When she hit the high notes, it wasn't just a display of vocal range. It was a display of her soul. She looked into the cameras and sang to everyone who had ever felt like they were running out of time. In that moment, the professional labels didn't matter. The social media comments didn't matter. There was only the music and the truth of her experience. When she finished, there was a moment of absolute silence before the audience erupted. The judges were visibly moved. Simon Cowell, known for his harshness, looked at her with genuine respect. Sydnie stood there, trembling, as she waited for the public vote to be tallied. The psychological tension of those final minutes was almost unbearable. She had done everything she could. She had laid her heart bare on national television. Now, her fate was in the hands of the people she had been so afraid of just weeks before. The host stepped forward to announce the winner. The room went silent. In that heartbeat, Sydnie's life hung in the balance. Would she be the champion, or would she be the runner-up who almost made it? The winner of Britain's Got Talent 2024 is Sydnie Christmas. The moment the words were spoken, Sydnie didn't jump for joy. She collapsed. It was a physical reaction to the end of a long, painful struggle. The weight she had been carrying, the weight of being too old, too professional, or not enough, finally fell away. She was the champion. The public had spoken, and they had chosen her. It was a landslide victory that proved the heart matters more than the history. The people at home hadn't seen a plant. They had seen a woman who refused to let her dream die, even when the world gave her every reason to walk away. The psychological relief of that moment was transformative. For the first time in her life, Sydnie didn't have to wonder if she belonged. The answer was written in the cheers of the crowd. In the days following her win, the narrative shifted. The critics were silenced by the sheer scale of her talent and the grace with which she had handled the pressure. Sydnie was no longer the gym girl with a dream. She was a star. But she remained humble, constantly reminding her fans that she was the same person she had been a month ago. The victory hadn't changed her talent. It had only changed her circumstances. The tragedy of Sydnie's story ends here, but the lessons remain. Her win was a victory for everyone who has ever worked a job they didn't love while holding a secret passion in their heart. It was a reminder that the world often overlooks the most beautiful things because they aren't new or young. Sydnie had to go through the fire of rejection to become the artist who could move a nation. Her victory was sweet, but it was earned with every tear she had shed over the last decade. But what does life look like after the glitter is swept away? For Sydnie, the real journey was just beginning. Winning a show like Britain's Got Talent is a life-changing event, but also brings a new set of psychological challenges. Sydnie went from being a receptionist to a household name overnight. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of her time. She was booked for interviews, photo shoots, and performances. The transition was dizzying. She had to learn how to navigate a world that finally said yes to everything. After years of no, this was a strange and sometimes overwhelming experience. Sydnie spoke openly in interviews about the imposter syndrome she felt. Even with a trophy in her hand, part of her still felt like the girl who was told she wasn't good enough. The psychological scars of a decade of rejection don't disappear just because you win a contest. Sydnie began to use her platform to talk about mental health and the reality of the arts industry. She didn't paint a picture of easy success. Instead, she was honest about the depression and anxiety she had faced. She became a voice for the struggling artist, showing that it is okay to be frustrated and okay to want to give up. This honesty only made her more beloved by her fans. They didn't just admire her voice, they admired her resilience. Her new reality included preparing for the Royal Variety performance, the ultimate stage for any British performer. As she rehearsed for the King and Queen, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. A few months ago, she was worrying about gym memberships. Now, she was representing her country's talent. The contrast was a constant reminder of how quickly life can change if you stay in the game long enough. As the biggest performance of her life approached, Sydnie realized that her journey wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much bigger. The story of Sydnie Christmas is more than just a rags to riches tale. It is a profound psychological study of the human spirit's ability to endure. When we look at her journey, we see a woman who faced the tragic reality of being forgotten by an industry she loved, yet she chose to keep her light burning. Her story teaches us that success is rarely a straight line. It is a jagged path through loneliness, self-doubt, and public scrutiny. Sydnie's final revelation was that her failures were actually her greatest strength. If she had found success at 18, she might not have had the emotional depth that moved the world at 28. The years of working at the gym, the isolation in Germany, and the silence of the pandemic were the things that gave her voice its power. She wasn't just singing notes, she was singing her life. Today, Sydney is finally where she belongs, on the stage. But she carries her history with her. She remains a grounded, empathetic figure who hasn't forgotten where she came from. Her journey reminds us all that too late is a myth. Whether you're 28 or 88, your passion still has value. The world might not see you yet, but that doesn't mean you aren't there. As we reflect on her story, we are left with a powerful thought. How many other people are currently working quiet jobs, feeling invisible, while carrying a world-class talent inside them? Sydnie Christmas didn't just win a talent show. She gave a voice to the overlooked. She proved that the most heartbreaking parts of our lives can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. If there is one thing to take away from the life of Sydnie Christmas, it is this: do not let the world's silence convince you that you have nothing to say. Your tomorrow might be closer than you think, and when it finally arrives, all the years of waiting will only make the music sound sweeter. Take a look at your own dreams today. Are you letting them fade because someone told you no? Perhaps Sydney's story is the sign you've been waiting for to try one more time. What could happen if you decided to keep singing?